All right, welcome back, everybody. We're going to pick up where we left off on our documentary. I got sources pulled up for the Cold War, World War II era. We're going to talk about Tavistock Institute, a lot of good stuff. I want to start with this, though. This was a television sign-off from the 1960s. There were only a handful of stations back then, and after a program would finish, they would play this national anthem video. It's short, it's like a minute.
Our national anthem.
Pay close attention, though. So this would have been played like every day. There's Lincoln with the fasces under his hand. Classic. The Empire State. Sol Invictus, or the Statue of Liberty. It's full of occult symbols. The Temple of Jefferson. The Phallus of Osiris. Another temple. Cathedral. Notice where my mouse is at the bottom. As above, so below. The eagle on top of the flag. One thing that stands out is nobody is singing. Why is nobody singing? Why are there subtitles? Are we supposed to sing it at home? No. The subtitles and the fact that no one's singing is meant to keep your eyes focused on the words, because hidden in this clearly government-made television sign-off is a secret message. There's a handful of secret messages. This is shocking. So as the scenes change, if it's slowed down enough, you can see a phrase flash before these phrases show up. This is going to transition from "Oh say can you see" to "the dawn's early light." The letters are going to come up left to right. And you're going to see as those letters, as if they were typing really fast, as those letters appear left to right, a message appears in its place before. Okay? So okay, "Oh say can you see" is disappearing. I'm going to play it through once, then we'll go through it slow. This is slow. I'll read it off, don't worry. As the words "by the dawn's early light" appear, it says, "Trust the U.S. government." Not even kidding. And it gets crazier. So, that's disappearing. T-R-U-S-T, the, right here, U.S. government. Trust the U.S. government. Shocking, right? It's even crazier. Hold on. As it transitions from the dawn's early light to "what so proudly we hail," it's going to show Lincoln with the fasces under his hand. I'll play it through once and then read it to you. Sickening. But what they say in this one is profound. It's possibly one of the most important hidden messages in symbolism that the government's ever given us. So as it transitions to Lincoln, first it says God on the left is real. That's what the first three words are. God is real. God is watching. And it flashes this message a few times throughout the whole video. God is real. God is watching. Why would that be subliminally hidden in a government-made national anthem television sign-off? First of all, you got to understand television programming. Its sole function, purpose, intention, and patent was to program people from the very beginning. To tell you a vision of reality, a false vision of reality. God is real. God is watching. So remember, we never did read any Boston Brahmin stuff. I was going to, but I reread it before this, and it's super boring, and y'all already get it. But, you know, the idea in Eastern mysticism of karma, and a lot of these fraternity, Masonic, occult types believe in karma, and they believe in what's called revelation of the method, that they can't do these things to us without first warning and telling us that they're coming. They need our consent, and they consider consent to be us, being flashed a message, and it's up to us to, decipher their messages. So this is what I think it is. It's some sort of revelation of the method, and for a little karmic relief for some sick people. God is real. God is watching. That's profound. Absolutely profound. Let's keep going here. Let's see what this next one is. As it transitions from the Statue of Liberty, whose broad stripes and bright stars. Let's play it. Believe in... Okay, hold on a second. Obey, consume, obey, consume. So the second half of this transition says obey, consume. Remember the movie They Live? Where the sunglasses they put on literally turn advertisements into signs that say obey and consume? Yeah. Crazy. This was the 60s. I want to know what this says, though. It definitely says believe in the beginning. Believing is not tolerated. Believing is not tolerated. Belief in what? The fact that God is real and God is watching? And then it goes on to say in this, rebellion will not be tolerated. It goes on to say all sorts of crazy stuff. It's sick. It's absolutely sick. Obey, consume, obey, consume. This one says, should be able to read it with a dark background like this. Yeah, REBELL. This is going to say rebellion will not be tolerated, or is not tolerated. There's ION, rebellion, is not, and then TOL, tolerated. It says something else here that looks important. So rebellion will not be tolerated. That stands out real clear. Boom. Rebellion is not tolerated. It's going to say something about God. It says God is, I think. God is real. God is watching, I believe it says again. Wow. That's crazy. What's the next one? Oh boy, this is nuts. Gave proof through the night. This might be hard to read. It's got a bright background. Obey, consume. Obey, consume. Again. So yeah. I mean, what can one even say about this? This is definitely the U.S. government using television to subliminally send messages, metaphysical messages, to the American people. It's shocking, isn't it? Last episode, we talked a little bit about the Tavistock Institute and their role in basically engineering society, how there's a science to it. There are powerful, wealthy, government-funded and protected institutions that come up with the different schemes, the different narratives. There are companies that train, hire, and send out actors to collaborate with the media. Today we'll be looking at the Church Committee, which was an exposure of all of this. We're going to be looking at some Tavistock literature talking about it. And I think the wisest place to start would be the Red Book by Carl Jung. And we should introduce all this by talking about how, I'd say, up until the decades after the Civil War, there was a pretty strong belief in parts of the country that witchcraft was real, of course, right? There was half of the country was a Christian, on a Christian basis, and believed in these things, believed in the occult, believed in what the Bible says about wizardry and about sorcery. In fact, I've been reading the books of Enoch, and I have it written above me on my whiteboard so I can remember it. But if I'm understanding it correctly, Enoch is talking about the fallen angels and how they've brought with them this heavenly wisdom that can be used for good or it can be used for evil. And he explains the nature of it as sorcery. Like each angel brought a different thing down. One of them brought sorcery. And then you have all sorts of stuff, dark magic. So this is where these mysteries come from. And when you look at Mesopotamian history and you line up the dates with it, it matches exactly the Mesopotamian pantheon. They had this pantheon of gods, these fallen gods that provided them with all of this knowledge, this astrology, witchcraft, dark magic, all of these mysteries, and they embraced it. And they embraced themselves as part God. And it's this sort of belief system that brings about the flood to, wipe the earth clean of all of this evil, right? So on one hand, you have Enoch warning, saying, yeah, these things may look appealing and they may look like they can make your life easier. It looks like you can manifest what you want and life will be great, but they have a dark side to them. Enoch warns us. And then we see in Mesopotamia, that's exactly what happens, is the dark side consumes Mesopotamia and God has to flood the earth. I mean, I may be wrong on a few things there, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going on in one of Enoch's books. And then after the flood, some of this, and don't forget the fallen angels mated with women, right? They spread their DNA, their seed, and they survive the flood. That DNA survives the flood, and eventually in Mesopotamia, once again, after the flood, eventually you have the rise of Babylon, which is once again a society that embraces these heavenly sciences that were not created for man, these sciences that the angels who fell brought down and gave to man that can be used for good or can be used for evil. So these are really concepts that make sense to Freemasonry as well, right? The duality. So this is where it comes from. At least this is what my research is leading me to. So for a long time in America, Christian America, people knew that. Certainly before the Civil War, they understood that technology and progression when it comes to all the little things in our life, it's always a double-edged sword. Technology is always a double-edged sword. And when you totally embrace technology without stepping back and saying, whoa, wait a second, it often leads to Babylon. And this is what the South is saying to the North during Civil War times. This industry is out of hand. It's unchecked. You guys, children die in your factories every day. You're not stepping back. You're not seeing if this is God's will, if this is, right to God. But the North doesn't believe in the same God that the Christian South does, you see. So that's one of the reasons the South remained agrarian like it did, because they knew of the impending danger of the double-edged sword that this intellect, this heavenly intellect given to us by fallen angels, they know that can be dangerous, right? And it's like when Eve bites the apple, right? She receives the intellect and instantly realizes they're naked. She instantly sins. She instantly has lust that causes her to realize they're naked. So they cover their privates with aprons, right? That's the sort of stuff, the science of the fallen angels, when I say that, the technology of the fallen angels, that intellect that the Freemasons worship so much. So without the South anymore, obviously it was an opportunity for these dark, occult beliefs to open the book again, right? Freemasons say that on the cathedrals of Europe, when you walk through the portal and enter, if the saint above the door, if his book is closed, it means the cathedral was built during a time when these sciences and these dark occult fallen angel beliefs and practices are subdued and can't be exposed because of Christian dominance in society. And when you go into a cathedral and the book is open, that means when the cathedral was built, society at that time was open and accepting of the mystery religion of Babylon or the worship of Lucifer. So if they were to build a cathedral today in America, you better believe the book would be open. And where I'm going with this is because that Christian voice was subdued after the Civil War, and, you know, I'll call it the Freemasonic North had total control, they were able to evolve the dark magics. They were able to evolve the fallen angel intelligence, right? And what was once called witchcraft or evocation, invocation, theurgy, these sorts of dark occult sciences, they were transitioned from exactly that into a more formal and official function. And psychology is a great example of that. A lot of the practices of psychology would have been regarded as occult during the 1800s and times before, right? So to back this up, I don't want to go into a huge monologue about that, but psychology itself is a science of thought. There's not much that's measurable, observable, and repeatable. A lot of it's speculation, and a lot of it's up to opinion, and a lot of it is based on the fallacy of authority. The authority that the DSM-5 has, the authority that the doctor has, right? Well, this person has a degree and wrote this book, aka Carl Jung, so, you know, maybe we have to listen to them, etc. And, you know, I can speak from personal experience, being someone who was a patient to a lot of these people involved in systems and stuff, and none of it ever worked. None of it ever worked. And it was all, yeah. Looking back, it's like, yeah, of course it didn't work. It's because it's, I don't even know what word to call it. But Carl Jung is a god of it, right? Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, anybody who goes to a 4-year college is going to learn about those two characters, no matter what. Everybody who takes one psychology class even is going to learn about Jung and Freud. And they really play a big role in making psychology accepted, psychology an official science, right? So taking these occult ideas and formalizing them. This is called the Red Book he wrote. And I did some background research. Apparently he wrote it during a very dark time in his life. It was a side project. He never finished it. He never shared it with anyone. It's sort of a magnum opus, but it didn't receive his full attention his whole life. And it's pretty fascinating. It's written in a way like no other book, and it's full of his artwork, which is really going to shock you. So remember, this is a required intellectual at all 4-year colleges, hands down. So, you know, Jungian psychology dominates the industry of psychology. And wait till you see some of his paintings. Knowing what you know from our studies here, these paintings are going to shock you. It's pretty sad. These are a lot of intros written by people who assembled this version of it and published it in 2009. So this was not published until 2009. He wrote it in a medieval sort of manuscript style. Pretty incredible, right? So the first letter here, look what's going on. We have space with the zodiac belt, of course, right? And then we have the solar cross. We have the moon. You see Saturn right there. What's right below Saturn? A crowned serpent. Wow, right? How about that? And look at this, coming out of a braising pot. What does this represent? The ascension, right? Freemasons would call it going through the degrees, enlightenment, becoming a God man, a Lucifer man, right? Mastering that intellect. At the bottom here we have the ocean with coral, jellyfish, fishies, and a little city. So we have that as above, so below. See how the colors match? We have the deep purple and blue of what they call space, and then we have the dark blue, the ocean down here. As above, so below. Saturn, of course, is right above the winged serpent, or the crowned serpent. Don't worry, there'll be winged serpents as well. And then you can see everything. There's a burning city right here at the top. Looks like there are warring armies. Yeah, there are, with a cannon. Every page tells a story like this. It gets crazier as it goes on, too. There's a translation at the end. I'm not going to bother trying to decipher any of these words. We're just going to look at pictures because chances are you've probably read some Jung before. Another time we'll read it, though. And he's like the follow-up to Sigmund Freud. And it's not that these guys don't have good ideas, it's that their ideas are philosophy. They're not science, and they shouldn't be used on children and stuff. It's crazy. So look in here. Inside the D, there's a coiled serpent, once again. And the serpent's surrounding a robed man. Maybe the initiate, we would call that. Freud's popular for the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex, which are those ideas that mother and son have an attraction and father and daughter have an attraction, which is, I guess, true in a way, right? You seem to connect with your mother if you're a son and your father if you're a daughter. He also came up with sort of the life force, death force idea, the left-hand, right-hand path paradigm. I think he called it the Thanatos and the Eros. And there's like two paths that the human can follow, one of enlightenment, one of self-destruction. And sometimes we hop between the two. Here we have the Egyptian scarab, I believe they call it, but it's really a dung beetle, right? And it's used to symbolize Ra. We'd have to do a little background research for me to go off on that. But you can see the sun symbol right here. Then a woman swimming in the waters. Looks like we have a man with a demon. Maybe he's invoking. You can see the eyes of the demon. This one's pretty incredible. Check this out, guys. We have a solar symbol at the top. On the left, we have a lion under a Masonic arch with what looks like some sort of orb above his head, which reminds me of the Egyptian sun worship. The symbol with like the pharaoh, and he has a disc, you know, the sun disc above his head with a snake coming out, showing that he's, you know, become a god man. He's enlightened. On the right, we have, one can presume, Aquarius, maybe, pouring out water, but that can also symbolize intellect, the river of intellect, right, being poured from the heavens. And to the right of that is another Masonic arch. Notice above, we'll call him Aquarius. Notice above Aquarius's head is Saturn, once again. These are important concepts of worship, different types of Luciferian worship. Look at this writing, dude. It looks like Lord of the Rings. Here we have a Babylonian star, which we'll be seeing a lot, the 8-pointed star. Remember, we were talking about it. Babylon descended from Mesopotamia. Ancient Mesopotamia was wiped out by the flood for their love of the fallen angel intellect, lifestyle, technology they created. And then descendants survived somehow, I think deep in the earth, if we did the research. I think that's the legend. And Babylon rose up after the flood as another example of the fallen angels' social style, lifestyle. And that star is a symbol of something. We'd have to look at it. It probably represents a pantheon of something. And it's all coming out of the fountain or the cup at the bottom there, the Holy Grail, right? So that's what the Holy Grail is, this body of knowledge given to us by the fallen angels. Wild. We got two guys shooting a dude off a cliff. Jung was into psychedelics. He was into hallucinating, trances, basically what would be called evocation, invocation, even decades before him. Literally. Like hallucinogens, and this was done under the influence of a lot of drugs. It was a dark period after he had gone into the deep recesses of his subconscious, aka taken a bunch of psychedelics, I think, and yeah, came out of it a different man, a dark man, for a little while. We have some interesting dualism. Red and blue are two colors you see in Masonic artwork a lot. Notice how one side is angular, straight-lined, square, represented by a cross, and then the other side is squiggly, serpent-like, represented by a circle. This is that duality. Here we can see the initiate Looks like they're being greeted by like a divine male and a divine female figure outside of a temple. The divine figures have the red and blue, and it looks like the initiate is wearing a white robe. The divine male and female are reaching a hand out to the initiate. So yeah, this is, like I said, deified intellectual in the four-year college system. Look at this one. We have the all-seeing eye. I Bilder des Irrenden. A little German. Okay, so maybe this is Infraktor German, which actually isn't that hard to decipher. This was the standard font in Germany for a long time. I think up until like the 1870s or something. You'd have to look it up. I'm not sure, but this was the standard font way longer than you'd think it would be, like till kind of recently. It could even be the 1900s. Look at that all-seeing eye. And then we have the vein and aorta system, oxygenated and deoxygenated blood system. Some of you might remember this from anatomy. This is another symbolic layer to the red and blue scheme, right? You have the blood rich with oxygen in the red aorta, right? And then it turns into capillaries at the top, and then the deoxygenated blood returns through the veins back to the heart to receive more oxygen, and then capillaries at the bottom again. So very interesting. But he also made it the shape of DNA, right? The helix. What a profound mind. Let's keep looking. Definitely worth a read. It's pretty heavy. I tried reading it a little bit. It's pretty dark, pretty heavy. This is a cool little fractal image. I want to get to some of the real heavy stuff here. Hold on. Let's try right here. Pretty beautiful stained glass painting. And maybe you've seen those sort of, what are they called, Mandelbrats or something? They're like on YouTube, those fractal trippy things. He's kind of doing an early representation of this and makes one assume this is probably some of the stuff he visualized hallucinating. The Babylonian star. This is fascinating because in Portland at the East End Cemetery, we have late 1700s, early 1800 graves with this exact same symbol on them. I think Masonic and Jesuit graves. This is pretty wild. There's that Babylonian star. Pretty crazy. But this is the sort of thinking that psychology comes from. You know what I mean? There's really nothing solid to it. Don't get me wrong, this is pretty cool art. This is a repeated symbol he uses over and over. Of course, you have 33. I'm not sure what else it could mean, though. The three-tiered base, the Osirian degrees, maybe. The first three degrees. There it is again, with the solar disk. Remember, those three Osirian degrees are shared by many of these groups, not just Freemasons. Whoa. Pretty crazy. Definitely an occultist. Big time. These kind of look like dendrites and neurons, right? Wow. Now, some of you might know this, but in Plato's Timaeus and Critias, that's where the legend of Atlantis is recorded. It was told by Solon. Solon lived 600 years before Plato. Solon traveled to Egypt for 10 years and learned from the priest in Heliopolis, I believe, and he brought back the legend of Atlantis from the Egyptians. Then he told it to Pliny the Elder, and then Pliny the Younger learned it from the Elder, I think, and then Critias, I believe, learned it from Pliny the Younger, and then eventually told it to Plato, something like that. Atlantis, that mythical land believed in by Masonry, had 3 types of rocks, and I actually have the book right next to me. We could even pull it up, but you'll take my word. The 3 types of rocks were black, red, and white on the whole island. So whenever you see a properly drawn interpretation of Atlantis, you're going to see the color scheme of black, red, and white, if it's adhering to the legend according to the way it's written. Colors have purpose. We got to start researching colors a bit more. Guys, check this out. At the top, we have like a yogi, and once again, black, white, red. He's also added brown. The Babylonian star bursting in the middle. And we have all these circles with 4 quadrants of those same colors in different, it's like it's film strip almost. On the right, there's like almost a Christian looking lady, and then on the left, another male or female. This bottom guy's weird. Not sure. I think this would represent the dark. Something like that. And this would represent the light. But notice this hand sign right here with the arms folded across the chest like an Egyptian pharaoh sarcophagus. It's called the sign of Osiris rising. That's popular in Masonry. It's part of rituals and whatnot. And then they're all inside of vesicas, which represent wombs, right? If you join 2 circles and overlap one's line over the circumference of the other, you'll get that vesica Pisces, which is a symbol of the female. So yeah, very focused on that Babylonian star. He wants you to understand that. It's like the centerpiece of every picture. Look at this. Dude's heart getting something done to it with the serpent, the black and red satanic color scheme. Pretty fascinating. But Jung's work is definitely part of the work that influences these think tanks, these elite think tanks that come up with the narratives. Here's the Masonic floor right there, right? Dead giveaway. Psychology would be used as a weapon, still is used as a weapon. Look at this. It would be used, with radio, with television, right away. These psychologists worked with places like the Tavistock Institute, Stanford Research Center, and they developed ways to not only control the public, but to, unfortunately, craft a false reality. That's ultimately what they've done since the advent of psychology and television. Here we have the serpent being cut open, and this is like a occult satanic version of Michael slaying the dragon. It looks like he's bathing in the blood. He's choosing to let the blood run over his you-know-what. This is sick. Weird. But yeah, 30 grand a semester? Sure, it's worth it. Cool. Oh yeah, what's this? Looks like a Baphomet to me. Ridiculous. Here we have another very occulty picture. There's a temple at the top, and then we have the as above, so below going on. Here's the guy dumping intellect. And now if you look at, we've done it before, you can look at hieroglyphs from ancient Egypt. Go to Google, look up ancient Egyptian hieroglyph anointing. And they use this symbol. So there'll be 2 guys pouring jars. In the jars will have the zigzag water coming out over the head of the pharaoh, and he'll be enclosed in it, kind of like the shape of an arch made out of this water. And that's important because what does the word Christ mean? It means to anoint. And to anoint means to pour or rub oil or wax over as a ceremony. Christos. That's why they call it Crisco oil, right? So that's their interpretation. They believe, anointing is basically just attaining that high degree of intellect in the satanic Freemasonic school of thought. And that's ultimately what's being symbolized here is he's anointing the earth. See the serpents down there? He's feeding the serpents. He's feeding the beast. Another Babylonian star, sun symbolism. Solar cross. Wow, this is actually a pretty beautiful painting. You see the lower realms down here, war. In the foreground, there's a bunker, they're training, they're at the shooting range. Then you have, behind the war, you have a beautiful estate. And to the right of it, you have the disgusting industrial part of society. It's really representing all these realms, but above them all exists, the eternal recurrence realm. This wheel in the sky, if you will, which can be attained through sitting like a Eastern person and putting a jar over your head, apparently. Here it is again. Now here's just some straight up Christian mockery. So we have this solar wheel, somebody sitting on like pieces of glass with the wheel crushing them. And then there's mockery of our Lord and Savior, Yeshua. There's a bull that's been sacrificed. Sound familiar? And then the tree of life ultimately being cut down. That's how sick these people are. So like if you have a kid in college, ask them if they learned about Jung, and they're going to say yes. And this symbol literally is mocking Yeshua, mocking the destruction of the Garden of Eden, mocking the destruction of God's creation, the sacrificing of the bull. Of course, they worship the bull, which symbolizes Baal. They all symbolize Lucifer in the end, but the golden calf being Baal worship. That's why the bull is on Wall Street. It's disgusting. This is the worst one, I think. And it says, love triumphant, I believe. Amor triumphant. Yeah. Love is triumphant. Love is another way of describing their god, Lucifer. Lucifer, Lucy, love. When they say they worship love, the religion of love, this is what they're talking about. Here's the serpent bringing the light. The serpent bringing the light. Lucifer, the torchbearer, the dragon, that old serpent. That's exactly what we're looking at as this guy appears to be calling out for help in the dark world below. How much debt are you in from college? Because I'm in a lot. Here we have a sun wheel that looks eerily similar to what the SS would use as their symbol. Not the two lightning bolts, but that wheel. Can't remember its name. Oh, man. Wow. This is pretty crazy. Some odd hieroglyphs. Like, what? Wow. So we have the Tree of Life again. This is a really beautiful painting, actually. But of course, a serpent at the bottom, right? This is definitely like an as above, so below, or duality sort of opposites. It's pretty wild. Looks like a turtle, an alligator, armadillo thing, serpent, another reptile. All creatures similar to the serpent. Bottom. Belly crawlers. What else we got here? Wow. That might be it for his like big portraits. Whoa, look at this one. 33 jumps out right away. That's crazy. And look at this. Look at this. This is the type of culture one learns at an American college. Does this look normal to you? Is this how you were raised? Look at these all-seeing eyes hidden here. This guy is like doing the sign of Osiris risen almost. Looks like he's holding something. I can't tell. Of course, a serpent is right below him. And you see this God-man figure is winged, right? This is exactly what I was just talking about with the Book of Enoch. This is the fallen angel. And he has this gift, it looks like. Looks like he's bringing this gift to man through temple. And there's the serpent, of course. Look at this duality at the bottom. The fire, the water, as above, so below, right next to one another. Ultimately, that's what's going on here, I believe. Wow. Worship of man. On the right, I think that's an acacia tree, and on the left is our familiar Masonic palm tree, symbol of victory. It's wild. He's got the sun behind his head. You know, he's enlightened. So like any speculative Freemason who religiously is a member of Freemasonry, not just like a Blue Lodge guy, would be able to give you similar interpretations of all this. Because this is what it symbolizes. Fallen angel, the gift of intellect being given to man. And I can't say this for sure, but I'm pretty sure whenever you see a dome, it's a temple. I think domes are temples. Like, I think churches with domes are actually built as temples secretly. Capitol buildings are temples. Museums are temples. Look at this. Whoa. We have like this false Christ about to show his face with this burning, looks like a burning metal sun above his head with the moon next to him. He's under a Masonic arch, of course. And notice, these are called vaulted roofs. What does that represent in a cathedral, the vaulted roof? It represents God's firmament, the stars in the vault. Wow. And it looks like the people are in chaotic sort of distress, except for this guy. Interesting. I think this is supposed to be the common folk arguing over who the Messiah is, because they consider us to be stupid like that, when they don't know the Messiah is just an enlightened man, according to them, not myself. Check it out, Star Fort. Actually, guys, this is symbolic. This is Atlantis. This is exactly Atlantis, how Plato gives its dimensions, not the star, but these concentric circles with the bridges. This is Atlantis to the T. So we have this occultist drawing Atlantis. Notice the cathedrals shaped like crosses with the colorful roofs. Normally, we would see our color scheme of white, black, red, but it appears he was doing something important with the yellow and black. Not quite sure. Of course, it's the Masonic floor, right? And it's the same floor you'll see on, the same checkerboard you'll see on every police officer in Western civilization. Wow, what a fascinating picture. That's crazy. I guess the Tartaria school of thought, I'm just starting to really look into it. These star forts were relics of a past of Tartaria. There's star forts all over the United States, and the story is they were built during Civil War times and between wars as well. But I don't know, maybe they're not. Why is he representing Atlantis, a 10,000-year-old city, as a star fort? Were the star forts in America here before the Europeans got here? Wow. That's crazy. I wouldn't be surprised at this point, you guys. Okay, this one's important because think of modern times. Look at this rainbow, right? We have this lotus flower sort of blossoming, false prophet representation of Lucifer with this rainbow coming at it. And the faces that are closest to it are the most refined. And, they look on with wisdom and with curiosity. But look at, as you get farther away, what happens. The faces get darker. They get more ape-like, right? They start to turn away at the very end. What's going on here? Well, Carl Jung was probably a eugenicist, because a lot of people were eugenicists back then. I wouldn't be surprised. It looks to me like he's interpreting black people as farther away from Lucifer than white people. I don't know. That's just me. But you know what? Black Lives Matter, more power to you. If you want to go learn about Jungian psychology at your 4-year schools, have at it. Guy was probably a eugenicist. A lot of them were. It's not hidden history. That's just well known. There were hundreds of American laws passed in all the states regarding sterilization, eugenics, all sorts of stuff. That is a little bit hidden. So I wanted to look at that because all of that stuff we just looked at, that belief system, that Freemasonic, Babylonian, Antichrist, like mystery Babylon religion body of thought, it's about to be used with all these new mediums of technology. So television, movies, magazine, radio, all of that. It's going to be controlled. It's going to be ritualistic. It's going to be symbolic. It's going to be ceremonial. They are going to take every aspect of our reality and craft it into that Babylonian school of thought, whether we knew it or not. And that's exactly what happens. So we're going to talk a little bit about this sort of psychological invasion of the media. So we'll talk about Tavistock. We'll talk about the Lucis Trust. We'll talk about Henry Luce in Time Magazine and how even today all of these media companies are controlled by a small group of people. But the Tavistock is a well-documented example of how the elite get together to manufacture a false reality. It's awful. Let's look at the table of contents because I haven't looked at this in a while. It's from the Executive Intelligence Review, May 24th, 1996, Volume 23, Number 22. The sun never sets on the new British Empire. And you can see the Queen here sitting with some representatives. So this is a journal you can pay for. I believe it still exists. Okay. The sun never sets on the British Empire. I just want to make sure we find the best one. So the monarchy, here's some different subjects. The Nazi roots of the White House, of the House of Windsor. Okay, we know that. Her Majesty's prerogative powers. British Empire buys the USA. Here we go. Section 2 is called Empire of the Mind. Tavistock's Imperial Brainwashing Project. That's what we'll be reading today on page 24. Tavistock's Brainwashing Project. Did I pass it? 11. 17. And page 24. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break. Then when I get back, we're going to read this. Okay. When it comes to psychology, the newly established science, and its relationship to media, government, military, religion, all aspects of society is going to be well demonstrated in this article by Mr. Wolf. It's called Tavistock's Imperial Brainwashing Project. Various types of belief can be implanted in many people after brain function has been sufficiently disturbed by accidentally or deliberately induced fear, anger, or excitement. Wow, very powerful opening sentence. We talk about it all the time. Trauma-induced mind control. This was one of the aspects of MKUltra. Remember, MKUltra had, I think, over 150 sub-projects that were below it, and that's some of the stuff they were doing. So traumatizing, inducing fear at all sorts of different levels have different effects on people, and on the societal level, oh boy. Let's continue. Of the results caused by such disturbances, the most common one is temporarily impaired judgment and heightened suggestibility. Its various group manifestations are sometimes classed under the heading of herd instinct and appear most spectacularly in wartime, during severe epidemics, and in all serious periods of common danger. Similar periods of common danger, which increase anxiety and so individual and mass suggestibility. That's written by psychiatrist Dr. William Sargent in the 1957 book Battle for the Mind. He was a member of the Tavistock Institute. Another psychiatrist, right? So, yeah, that we can apply that to 2020, right? The whole thing was a psychological operation the entire year. Look at it, and this is most effective during severe pandemics. This was known in the 1950s, epidemics, sorry. Herd instinct. They mock us, you guys. When they use the term herd immunity on the news, it's mockery. Once again, let's continue. I think the subject that will be of most importance politically is mass psychology. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Oh my goodness. Unbelievable. This is the goal of these mystery schools. I'm telling you, has to be truly what the craft is of Freemasonry and of all these other mystery schools, to manifest a reality that is so fake, in fact, completely fake. Because if they do that, think about it, knowledge is power. If you convince the people to believe things and all of it is fake, then they will never be able to take the power from you. And that's exactly what's going on today. Wow. Let's continue. Various results will soon be arrived at. First, that influences of the home are obstructive. Second, that not much can be done unless indoctrination begins before the age of 10. It is for the future scientists to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. That was a quote from Lord Bertrand Russell in his 1951 book, The Impact of Science Upon Society. Once again, another standard psychological Ivy League sort of educational figure. How evil was that? That was literally the most evil thing I've read in a while. The scientific psychology right off the bat was the scientific process of convincing the population that the snow is black, making it an unshakable conviction that snow is black, up is down. It's ridiculous. And it's very hard to accept. It's extremely hard to accept some of the truths. I'm scared to talk about this stuff with people in real life. You know, like old friends who don't know about this and everything. It's impossible to try and tell people that space isn't real. Oh my gosh, that we don't live on a spinning ball. It's insane. But unfortunately, they've perfected the science of creating an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Oh my goodness. There's just up and down. Density, mass, volume. There's no gravity. Gravity, there's no need for gravity. Up is up, down is down. Density, that's what causes things to rise and fall. Mass. Ugh, it's impossible to get through to people. Okay, let's continue. The late former foreign minister of Guyana, Dr. Fred Wills, once said that the most of the diplomatic corps of the former colonies of Great Britain spent too much time trying to perfect their Oxbridge accents. The rest of the time, he stated, they spent searching for a British rump to kiss. Trying to explain this behavior to his American friends, Wills said that colonialism still exists in its most powerful form, as a state of mind of the subject peoples, even if the former colonies have been given their nominal freedom. Yeah, think about that in terms of the Civil War, right? It had nothing to do with slavery. The North had more slaves than the South. They had just transitioned them into a new form of slavery. They had colonized the minds of the Northern people. Didn't matter what color they were. And today they've colonized the minds of everybody. Nobody ever got sick. I haven't said that in a while, but don't forget, nobody ever got sick. Wills was commenting on the success of a long-term project of the British imperial elite. That's an important opening sentence. This is a long-term project of the British imperial elite. Now, what body of society would be able to carry out a long-term, multi-generational project like this? A fraternity, a union, a society, right? Effectively keynoted in remarks by Winston Churchill to an audience of Anglophiles at Harvard University on September 6, 1943. Churchill was then locked in battle with U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had, on several occasions, made clear his intent to dismantle the British and all other empires at the conclusion of the war. While refusing to concede American authority to impose a post-colonial solution on the empire, a consensus emerged in the imperial elite among the families closest to the royal family that the old imperial structures could not be continued. To maintain control, it was proposed to shift the battlefield away from control of territory to control of minds, not merely of the colonial peoples, but of the United States and the rest of the Western world. Whether the author of this knows it or not, this was the plan between them all. Franklin Delano was acting his part in the plan. Churchill was acting his part in the plan. We talked about something just slipped my head, but they're talking about transitioning from a territory-based control to the control of minds. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a master of this as well, with his fireside chats during the Great Depression. He ushered in a completely new government, basically, a completely new federal government with all this social security and government organized and funded and controlled entities. That was all FDR. The guy went for 4 terms. That's how powerful radio was. That's how powerful the science of the mind is. I wish I could remember what I was going to say. A long-term plan. It'll come to me, don't worry. A post-colonial solution on the empire. Oh, it's wild. Okay. In his remarks, which were broadcast internationally, Churchill proposed that his Anglophile allies within the United States join with their mother England in a new enterprise. It is our 2 countries, he said. I remembered. The letter between Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini states that the purpose of World War II will be to bring down the old structure of kings and queens, to officially end the monarchies. Maybe that was World War I, or I think it might have been both. That was the goal of these world wars, was to destroy the old system, order out of chaos, so that the phoenix could rise from the ashes, if we're to put it in Masonic terms, right? So World War II, one of the purposes of it was to transition from this control of territory to this control of minds. Sick. Let's continue, though. It is our 2 countries. Remember, this is Churchill talking about America and England. It is our 2 countries, he said, with his typical pompousness, that control the destiny of the world, who control science and technology, who control culture. These are weapons far more potent than military power, Churchill declared. To control what men think offers far better prizes than taking away other people's lands or provinces or grinding them down in exploitation. The empires of the future will be the empires of the mind. Sounds a lot like what was going on in Mesopotamia. Sounds like exactly what Enoch was warning about, and exactly what caused God to flood the world, and exactly what made Babylon so evil. This is nothing new under the sun. This is that fallen angel science. This is witchcraft. This is doing things telepathically to affect people, like saying one thing but having a different intention, you know? That's witchcraft at a very basic level, right? Evil. Churchill's secret weapon in this battle for the mind was an elite group of brainwashers and psychiatrists, then operating in the Army's Directorate of Psychological Warfare under the command of Brigadier General John Rawlings Rees. These were the cadre of the Tavistock Clinic, based in London's suburbs. They had already built a network of co-thinkers in the United States in various university locations, including Harvard, and wartime operational bases with the Office of War Information and the Office of Strategic Services. So well established in America through academia and the military. Another good example is the Frankfurt School at Columbia. In addition, Britain's psychological warriors had established a beachhead in Hollywood in the emerging radio, television, and motion picture industries. At the end of the war, the Tavistock Network, which numbered several hundred individuals, re-entered civilian life, but remained under the central command of British policy circles. They proceeded to spawn numbers of think tanks, institutes, and other nodes, Tavistock's term for its various allied centers of activity, in every part of the globe, dominating every key aspect of social policy. Today, the Tavistock core group numbers in several score thousand. That core group, in turn, has trained close to 1 million cadre by their own estimates, who serve as teachers and advisors to nearly all business, military, political, and educational elites. In ways subtle and some not so subtle, operating as a conspiracy intervening on individual human consciousness. They have attempted to not only shape what people think, but to establish the parameters and limits of thought itself. So when somebody comes up to you and says space isn't real, and you say, BS, how could every country in the world have a space agency? This is how. It's not far-fetched. Be logical. Evil. This is Lucifer's world that we live in. It's very easy. What is Tavistock? Still exists. The Tavistock Centre, located in buildings in the London suburb for which it is named, is composed of the Tavistock Clinic and the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations, which in turn has 5 component institutions. Over the last 5 decades, it has founded a network of international nodes with functions as mini Tavistocks and are involved in joint projects. Its quarterly journal, Human Relations, published since 1947, serves as an effective briefing for the network on its more public work. Think about it. Every big corporation in the world has what kind of department? Human Relations. It's all connected through institutions like Tavistock. The Tavistock Network owes its origins to the 1920 founding of the Tavistock Clinic, under the direct patronage of the royal family. Through HRH, Duke George of Kent, the clinic soon earned the nickname the Freud Hilton. Wow, for its promotion of the pseudoscience of psychoanalysis. There's our Freud and Jungian psychology connection. However, it quickly broadened its horizons to include various other psychological theories. Unifying all of its theoretical studies was the oligarchical view of man as a beast, whose impulses and urges could be controlled and tamed as one does with animals. Sound familiar? Remember in the very first episode we talked about John Locke and Hobbes? What's Hobbes' first name? Thomas Hobbes, I think. Thomas Hobbes, back at the founding of, colonial times, was arguing that man is a beast, right? Man is born evil. He's born a beast. While on the other hand, the opposite philosophers of that time are saying, no, man is born with a blank slate, tabula rasa. He's the result of his family, of his society. And I tend to agree with the latter. I don't think people are born beasts at all. But the Tavistock Institute and the controlling elite psychological units of the world, they think we need to be controlled and tamed. Unbelievable. Tavistock's usefulness to its imperial masters can be gleaned from the work of its leader, John Rawling Rees, a virulent race patriot and believer in eugenical theories. Rees has studied war neurosis in France during World War I. We talked about eugenics as well. I made the assumption that Jung was probably a eugenicist, and now we have a little bit of circumstantial evidence to think that might be true. His boy Rees was. Okay, his conclusion of studying war neurosis in France. Under controlled conditions, neurotic behavior could be induced, and through these methods, individual behavior could be absolutely controlled. In later years, Tavistock operatives such as Dr. Kurt Lewin would elaborate on Rees's discovery and develop methods for inducing controlled irrational behavior by groups of people. Tavistock, through Rees and others, proposed that its theories be put in service as a means of social control during times of peace. In his 1945 book, The Shaping of Psychiatry by War, Rees reported that the work of the Tavistock group during the war demonstrated conclusively that there was a psychopathological tenth of the population who were genetically dullards. These dullards, should their numbers not be controlled, would soon dominate civil society. It were therefore necessary to devise methods using psychiatry to control such people and prevent their increase in numbers, and to control their even larger populations in backward colonial lands. What he's saying is that this 10% of the population that are dullards or dumb can't be allowed to expand, or they run the risk of taking over society and making all of society dumb. This is mockery. The truth is the opposite, that they are trying to make the whole population dullards while 10% of the population is awake. And that 10% that's awake, that is why this science is employed, so that that 10% can be reduced to a number that's less dangerous. Remember, in the 2009 Department of Defense counterinsurgency document, it said, when it comes to insurgency or employing a narrative, getting people to believe things, it only takes 10% of the population to convince the 90% of the population to acquiesce. This is how things like the Holocaust happen and how the gulags happen, right? It only takes a small amount of people to get all of society on board with something. So that 10% of us that are awake, we do have the potential to wake everybody up. And the whole science, the shaping of psychiatry by war, all of this Tavistock science is about keeping that 90% stupid and hopefully getting closer to 100% stupidity. Complete control, complete domestication. And today, it's not looking good. Today, we're probably more awake than ever, but the effects are so permanent. Like, oh man, it's bad. Let's continue though. Of the remainder of the population, there were some people who, if their neurosis could be controlled, might be useful to the very small group of people whose genetic breeding and psychological training allegedly suited them for leadership. These are eugenicists. Planned Parenthood was founded by a eugenicist, Margaret Sanger. That's why all Planned Parenthoods are in inner cities, because these people literally are the racist and they want to kill off minorities. For recent Tavistock, the job of psychiatry was to conduct the selection process by which society was divided and responsibility doled out among the dullards, the useful neurotics, and a genetically determined superior 10% at the top. Psychiatrists, Rees said, must be involved in all levels of society, prepared to intervene at any place, the home, the job, the schools, at any time. If we propose to come out into the open, wrote Rees, and to attack the social and national problems of our day, then we must have shock troops, and those cannot be provided by psychiatry based wholly on institutions. We must have teams of well-selected, well-trained psychiatrists who are free to move around and make contacts with the local situation in their particular area. Sick. Unbelievable. Rees's book was based on a series of lectures that he gave to his networks in the United States. Within 2 years of the book's publication, Tavistock had expanded its operations in Britain and the Empire, and enlarged its beachhead in the United States. To the Tavistock Clinic was added the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. Yes, your HR department. Probably is on an email chain connected to the Tavistock Institute. They created the HR department of Tavistock to train and deploy the teams of mobile psychiatric shock troops in the United States. Lewin's Research Center for Group Dynamics, the spin-off National Training Laboratories, and the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan were all established. Money poured into this effort from royal family-sponsored charitable trust, as well as from the Rockefellers, the Mellons, the Morgans, just to name a few U.S. oligarchical families whose pockets opened to the Tavistock brainwashers. Yes, this is why you have colleges like Johns Hopkins, you have schools founded by the Rockefellers, you have institutes, the Bill and Melinda Gates Institute. This is why buildings all across the country on college campuses are named after Bill Gates' father, are named after the Rockefellers, right? Virtually every campus has a building named after somebody connected to this giant conspiracy of evil. I gotta get more coffee. This is wild. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. Next subsection's called Restructuring the Empire. The British elites tabbed their Tavistock network to play a critical role in the post-war restructuring of their empire and its transition into the Commonwealth. In 1947, as the Tavistock Institute was being created, Rees was moved into the United Nations apparatus, creating the World Federation of Mental Health, along with Montague Norman, the leading banker of the British Crown, and the man who had maneuvered Hitler and the Nazis into power. Rees helped create more than 36 affiliated organizations around the globe, which each promoting his neo-Freudian radical selection theories and targeting and selecting local elites for British patronage. Meanwhile, he collaborated with Sir Julian Huxley, then heading the UN Economic, Social, and Cultural Organization, also known as UNESCO, in devising programs to assist the selection of leadership cadre within the colonial sector for special training. The UN bureaucracy itself was similarly infested with Tavistock-type group training programs to indoctrinate and control whatever cadre were sent through its mind mills. Fred Wills described the UN bureaucracy as the world's longest, continuously run brainwashing program. for developing sector leaders. Those who entered it, if they indeed ever came out, had lost all touch with reality. At the same time, UNESCO set up educational and cultural programs in the colonial sector, which quickly became mechanisms for Tavistock-designed brainwashing. When these methods of control failed, as they often did, the British Crown turned to the same Tavistock psychological warriors to devise methods for creating controlled terrorist movements. Tavistock operatives assisted army units in the creation of what were called gangs and counter-gangs in the colonial sector. The technique was laboratory tested by Brigadier General Frank Kitson in the 1950s in Kenya, where brainwashing and torture were used on prisoners in British POW camps to create phony, British intelligence-controlled units of the Mau Mau insurgency, legitimate national liberation movements, fighting to win freedom from the British yoke, were penetrated and broken, their leaders killed ostensibly by rival factions. In 1970, Kitson was sent to Northern Ireland, where he, not the Irish Republican Army, launched an urban murder and bombing spree that triggered a quarter-century of violence and psychological terror. That's where my family comes from. We're from County Offaly, which is in the center of Ireland, my mom's side, but my recent ancestors were living in Northern Catholic Ireland. Following Rees's departure from Tavistock, the man who ultimately took charge of the network was a Rees protege, Eric Trist. Trist's primary assignment was to expand Tavistock's operations in the United States, but first he launched a major Tavistock project, management training, in Tavistock operational research. With the approval of the highest circles of the British elite, Tavistock's brainwashers were contracted by the Empire's corporate entities to restructure their management and workforces from within. One section of this was targeted at breaking the power of trade unions by inducing them to become part of management teams, or co-participation. But by far the largest component of these operations placed management itself through group profiling and therapy-like sessions to force higher productivity. Among the corporations put through the brainwashing were Shell, Unilever, the British government, coal industry, and several major financial institutions. Today, most major corporations have staff psychologists or contracts with them, while corporate meetings are often run by a group leader called a facilitator, hired for the task. We've all been to a facilitator-run work meeting, right? That was a Tavistock invention. This language they're using. Post-industrialism and neo-colonialism. Writing in a 1990 Tavistock anthology titled The Social Engagement of Social Science, Trist laid out Tavistock's current mission statement. Quote, "All nodes express the philosophy of the social engagement of social science. The engagement is with meta-problems that are generic and field-determined, rather than with issue-specific single problems." End quote. Translated from Tavistockian psychobabble into English, Trist is stating that Tavistock does not merely study a large social problem, but intervenes to bring about a desired result. Once again, Hegelian dialectic being turned into official science and government-funded. He continues, quote, "The work is future-oriented and concerned with a transition to the post-industrial social order and the paradigm shift which this entails," end quote. What they mean by post-industrialism as neo-colonialism is this shift from manufacturing, and of course we've seen that in America, there's no more factories, and the neo-colonialism aspect is to obviously colonize the mind, which is exactly what climaxed in 2020, and now everybody's living in their own little homes as prisoners. Just like A Call for an Uprising says on YouTube all the time, they are creating a prison out of the home. And soon, if everybody keeps going along with this, we will be permanently electronically connected to a system where we can be monitored at all times. We already are through our cell phones, but eventually it's going to fuse with the body. This is a goal. This is their goal. And we'll do a side episode about this transhumanism thing, but the idea is to incorporate technology into man and connect all people to a system of surveillance and a system of control to essentially create a hive mind. And you see, this is why the Freemasons use the beehive as their symbol. Bees have an incredible ability to take orders from the queen, right? They're all connected somehow. That's a great mystery. That's exactly what they want to do with us through technology. And this is Fallen Angel Technology 101, guys. So this is what's coming. When they talk about neocolonialism, they're colonizing our mind. Without doing anything physically, they've restricted the movement of millions and millions and millions of people. Like, I don't go anywhere because I have to wear a face mask to go inside places, right? Without ever physically even seeing me, they've restricted my movement. They've colonized my mind. They've colonized my city. Pretty wild, right? Let's continue. Tavistock's work in this area dates back to the 1950s when it conducted studies on the impact of cybernetics. Remember that term. That's very important. Cybernetics. One word. The impact of cybernetics on the workforce of industrial countries and on the emergence of the service-oriented economy. That's what we live in today. In the 1960s, Tavistock operatives conducted studies on the effects of the Kennedy space program on Americans and found that they were contributing to inhibiting the post-industrial shift. British-controlled policy interests moved to shut down a space program. During the 1960s, Tavistock produced a series of reports and papers spelling out how to affect the post-industrial shift. The seminal work was done by the man Trist himself, who was at that time based in the United States, and his protege, Fred Emery, working out of Tavistock and Australia. Their work is summarized in a 1973 volume called Towards a Social Ecology, Contextual Appreciation of the Future in the Present. Academic mumbo-jumbo language, classic, psychobabble. The problem confronted by Trist and Emery on behalf of their imperial masters was as follows. For the last 100 years, the world had been governed by the industrial paradigm, in which people saw that application of new technologies has produced a better life for increasing numbers over successive generations. Now, however, we have the emergence from backwardness of the former colonial world. The emerging nations, if they are assimilated into this industrial paradigm, will desire the same route to progress and a better life. Industrial progress, thus, explicitly threatens the power of the British oligarchy, creating the basis for the establishment of nation-states that oppose continued oligarchical rule. Wow. Okay, Tavistock Center's international nodes. So, pen and paper, get your tablet out if you want. They're going to list off this is 1996, they're going to list off a bunch of Tavistock institutions across the world. You're going to recognize a lot. Hold on. Okay, here's the intro. The Tavistock Center, which is comprised of the Tavistock Clinic and the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations, has 5 subunits in London. The Human Resources Center, the Center for Applied Social Research, the School of Family Psychiatry and Community Health, the Institute for Marital Studies, and the Institute for Operational Research. The following list of the center's international nodes is drawn from Eric Trist and Hugh Murray's The Social Engagement of Social Science, a Tavistock Anthology, Philadelphia Press, University of Pennsylvania Press, 1990. The names given are initiating individuals. The commentary is EIRs. The names given are, that's what they call them, initiating individuals. Does that sound familiar to you? Remember, the language is extremely important. Right? Initiation. United Kingdom. Here are the affiliated groups in the UK. Scottish Institute of Human Relations. Jock Sutherland, created in the 1960s by Sutherland, a former director of the Tavistock Institute. Center for Family and Environmental Research by Robert and Rona Rappaport. Robert Rappaport had been involved in a Tavistock study that led to the dismantling of the U.S. space program. The Department of Continuing Management Education by Loughborough University. Garth Higgin promotes sensitivity training among management elites. The Foundation for Adaptation in Changing Environments with Mr. Tony Ambrose, Harold Bridger. It promotes a post-industrial paradigm shift. It is now based in Geneva because of its close affiliation with the UN's World Health Organization. Organizations for Promoting an Understanding in Society, or OPUS, what a great word for it, by Eric Miller, established by Sir Charles Goodeve, the Dean of British Operational Research and a Tavistock board member. Okay, other places in Europe. The Work Research Institute in Oslo, Norway. This was founded by Eric Trist and Fred Emery, Tavistock, okay. Including through UN programs on control of technology and social ecological brainwashing. Also the School of Business Administration, Erasmus University. Also the Institute for Transitional Dynamics, Switzerland. In Australia, they control the Centre for Continuing Education. In Canada, they control Action Learning Group, Faculty of Environmental Studies, York University. They control Quality of Working Life Centre in Ontario. Even in India, the BM Institute and the National Labour Institute of Punjab. In the United States, the Wright Institute at Berkeley, the A.K. Rice Institute, the Center for Quality of Working Life, UCLA, the Department of Social Systems Sciences, all over. So they've just planted all these nodes into academia, of course. And being someone who's been to 3 different colleges, yeah, it's all over the place. They're just brainwashing factories. And remember, it said it only takes 1 generation to institute this, so we're at like 3 generations into it. So my teachers, my professors, all believe in space. We got a problem, guys. This is big. This is biblical. Like, please come out of Babylon. I beg you. Just start over. That's what I did. Start over. I just erased my brain, literally, and started over. Let's continue this document. Tristan Emery came up with the following answer. Well, we should read the question again. The problem confronted by Tristan Emery on behalf of their imperial masters was as follows. Okay, switching from industrialism to this neo-colonialism, the colonialism of the mind. So Tristan Emery came up with the following answer. If a post-industrial paradigm is imposed on the advanced sector, then it will also define the limits of growth for the developing sector. Since such nations as those in Africa are several decades from being assimilated into the post-industrial paradise, there will be a mixed system of post-industrial advanced countries and semi-industrial and mineral extractive lands in the developing sector, they indicate. This imbalance defines the basis for continued exploitation and control of these areas by the British-dominated world oligarchy. Basically saying we're going to do a top-down, like trickle-down theory, more mockery, like Reagan's trickle-down theory. They're going to change the paradigm in the ruling class, which will in turn affect everybody else, because if they can convince all the factory owners, all of these industrialists and politicians and people who control business, if they can convince them to transition from manufacturing and industry and start, working on not that, maybe convince them to start getting factories offshore in developing countries. Sound familiar? And then they can focus on the social aspect of everything and creating new industries. You know what I mean. Creating the HR industries that we have today. All of these psychology-based industries. Wow. So yeah, Tavistock was responsible for helping the U.S. government get rid of all of our manufacturing and send it to China over those decades, right? By training the corporate elite to embrace this new paradigm. And as a result, all the people like us, we just lose out. So we don't have a say. It worked. Continuing, the question is then posed, how to get society to make what are called in the Tavistock circles Recian or critical choices, in which all of the possible choices are bad and lead to a degraded condition. Tavistock had clinically proven that an individual will make such choices when placed under extreme stress, and, most importantly, will fail to see the rejection of the parameters of the choice itself as an option. Emery and Trist reported that if society were put through extreme stress, what they termed social turbulence, the appropriate degenerated and psychotic mental states could be induced in the mass of Western population to make a choice for a post-industrial future. Like we always say, they design it so that we beg for the result that they want. They want us to beg for the VAX, right? They want us to beg to be connected to a 5G system. They want us to beg to become part of the Internet of Things. And it works on people. It works on a big enough portion of the population where it's happening. It's going to happen, right? We are part of a very small group that see through it. And remember, it says right here, most importantly, They will fail to see the rejection of the parameters of the choice itself as an option, right? So us, the small group, we can just reject it all. We can just stand back and say we don't want to take part in any of it. But there are millions, in fact, the majority of people in America, they don't understand that they have that option because they believe that everything going on is completely real and they have no control over it. They think there really is this tiny physical microbe floating in the air that can potentially give you a sickness, right? So if you believe that, there's no option out of it, right? Just like if you believe in space and the Big Bang and evolution, there's no need for the spirit. Like, this is the sick manufacturing they do of society, and it's bad. God has picked you and me and this community of truthers. We have been picked to try and stop this. This is crazy, right? I wish I could meet all you guys. We're a small group. We're a humble group. The Tavistock brainwashers spoke of a period of successive social, economic, political, and cultural shocks beginning in the 1960s that would create a vortex-like push of mental states to successively more degenerate levels of defensive adaptation. All of these malapative responses, as they call them, are present in the society at the same time, interacting with each other, to produce neurotic behaviors on a grand scale. To a world put through terror and stress, a post-industrial future looks bright, they offer. The role of the Tavistock shock troops, say Tristan Emery, is to assist the weary and bring them over the threshold into the new post-industrial age. Okay, the drug, rock, and sex counterculture. We've talked about this before. We did a little episode on the Grateful Dead. All their concert posters have Masonic symbolism on them. They would play in Masonic halls in California in the early days. We also know that some of the MK Ultra and Mockingbird projects, most of them were headed by military men and involved military men. And in California, a lot of the sons of these military brass involved in these projects would become the rock and roll generation. In Europe, too, all across the world, actually. So, Jim Morrison was the son of a military guy, World War II vets, right? These rock and roll stars were all the children of World War II vets who were in the intelligence military-industrial complex. And the creation of rock and roll, which I would have never guessed, it was completely manufactured and created as a Tavistock operation of mind control. I would have never guessed. One of the most fascinating things to me as a child was the counterculture. It was the first part of history that really got me going into history, right? And then I found out last year pretty much that it was all fake. It was all fake. Let's read about it. There's a Hollywood Air Force base somewhere near Hollywood that the CIA used as a movie studio. It's called Lookout Mountain. I can't remember. We'll do an episode about it. Drug, rock, sex, counterculture. Thus, it should come as no surprise that the British Empire, working largely through Tavistock, was the driving force behind launching the drug, rock, sex counterculture. Tavistock shock troops, such as Dr. William Sargent and Dr. Ewan Cameron, were brought in to lead the Pentagon and Central Intelligence Agency's 1950s and 1960s secret experiments with psychotropic drugs and mind control, known as MK Ultra. I swear I haven't even read this before. I just knew it was going to be great. And boom, there's exactly what we're talking about. I actually have a text where it goes into detail about this, about a man named Stanley Augustus Owlsley III. And he was a chemist that was contracted by the CIA, and him and his cohort were the ones responsible for manufacturing the acid that flooded the nation and helped, get this going, this Tavistock project going. So sick. So, continuing. Tavistock fellow traveler Aldous Huxley, the guru of the 1960s New Age movement, was living in Hollywood, working in the motion picture industry, and cranking out such works as Brave New World, which, decades before the first doses of LSD-25 hit the streets, already advocated societal drugging as the ultimate form of social control. You guys all know that book. Huxley was even more explicit about his and Tavistock's agenda. In a 1961 lecture at the California Medical School in San Francisco, sponsored by the U.S. State Department's Voice of America, Huxley told the crowd of doctors, psychiatrists, and government bureaucrats, quote, "There will be in the next generation or so a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak. Producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it, because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods, and this seems to be the final revolution," end quote. Yep. That's what we're living in. Stop shopping at Whole Foods. Remember, don't forget opposites, you guys. Don't forget opposites. Whole Foods organic section has more poison than any other food there is. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it, dude. Shop at the oldest grocery store in town. That's the best move you can do. Try to not use a Hannaford's either. Try to use a local, very old one. The one with dusty, dirty shelves. Go to that one. Oh my gosh, dude. We're literally heading into a brave new world. So, this is so crazy. Now, remember, we were looking at the Red Book by Carl Jung, so before these guys were even doing this, Carl Jung was taking these drugs. Carl Jung was dabbling with the occult. He was invoking and evoking spirits, demons, through drug use, pharmakia, and he was writing down what they told him, drawing pictures of what they showed him. And it's minds like that influence Tavistock psychiatry. This is crazy, dude. Let me show you something. I have a little library. It's like the size of a mailbox near my house where people randomly put books in. Some of you might remember this. Cookbook for a Sacred Life. This comes from the Lama Foundation, which is a basically like Dalai Lama Eastern philosophy foundation, but they basically bring these gurus over from the East to America. This was published in 1971, right? And this whole New Age movement really takes off. And it's a result of Tavistock drugging everybody and starting the counterculture. And then you have all these Eastern people coming over bringing yoga and meditation and things that used to be practiced inside Masonic lodges are now being promoted to the people. How many people do you think know that yoga positions are occult, sexual, fertility stuff? None of them, dude. They have no clue that yoga is a practice of invoking fertility spirits. I want to show you this because this 1971 book written by this guru actually has one of our favorite symbols in it. You guys are going to laugh so hard. This is all about Eastern philosophy, right? This is all about chakras, yoga, Antichrist stuff. Check this out. Look at what this chapter has. Unbelievable. Just like the 1916 convocation of the Rose Cross Order, having a lecture called A Truly Mystic Seal talking about this. Here we have this Dalai Lama book, once again displaying a truly mystic seal. How unbelievable. They're all the same cult. And one of my viewers sent me a book called Enthralled, exposing all of this, exposing these Eastern clowns, exposing Shambhala, and writing the truth about what these practices are to Hindu people, what they are in history, and it's all occult. It's all ultimately Luciferian. So I don't take part in any... I mean, Christians meditate. We meditate, right? It's just not with the intention and the method that, you know, yogi Eastern meditation is. The purpose of meditating in Shambhala and stuff like that is to open up the third eye to demons. They always leave out those last two words. They say, open up your third eye to demons. That's what happens. These spirits that come into you. Okay. That quote by Aldous Huxley. Holy shnikes. Continuing. Tavistock oversaw the mass drugging of America's college students in the late 1960s. It helped launch gangs and counter-gangs, which the zombified youth joined. Yeah. Warriors, come out and play. Notice how Hollywood's always side by side with all these natural societal changes. They're always just waiting there. Unbelievable. Meanwhile, Tavistock's in-place network of institutes and clinics, such as Esalen in California, put hundreds of thousands of youths and others through brainwashing, sensitivity sessions, as Tavistock created and trained gurus, such as Timothy Leary, help lead the drug-infested masses into the new age. In 1967, Tavistock even sponsored a summer-long brainwashing session in London dubbed the Conference on the Dialectics of Liberation. American radicals Angela Davis and Stokely Carmichael were among the participant victims in this session. A generation once slated to lead the United States and the world into an era of unprecedented progress and prosperity was thus transformed into a collection of doped-up zombies, change agents, and shock troops for Tavistock's brave new world. That's why we're at where we're at. It's not your fault, parents. It's not your fault. These people are evil. People are sick. Okay, the New Order, Stateless World Fascism. In 1991, Tavistock devoted significant space in its journal, Human Relations, to the publication of results of a multi-year project on world governance and social change that had been initiated by Trist in the 1980s and involved participants from many Tavistock nodes and international networks. The results of the study must be viewed as a policy recommendation to the imperial elite, whom Tavistock serves. Its results can be summarized as follows. The collapse of the Soviet Union as a superpower created new possibilities for world governance and for the full entrance of the world into the post-industrial era. The greatest impediment... hold up, is that not exactly what Giuseppe Mazzini and Albert Pike said was going to happen? Literally. Let's read that last sentence. The collapse of the Soviet Union as a superpower created new possibilities for world governance and for the full entrance of the world into the post-industrial era. That was literally the exact same thing Pike and Giuseppe were talking about decades before this. The greatest impediment to that change was the continued existence of the nation-state. As long as the Soviet Union existed, the continuance of the nation-based world system in some form was necessary to maintain a balance of power. Notice how they didn't include America? Yeah, that's because 1871, it was sealed. We were done. We were already part of the global governing system. Just because they don't tell you that there's a global government doesn't mean there isn't a global government. There most certainly is. The Soviet Union must have represented an actual threat to them. Okay. But of course, they created the Soviet Union, right? So it's insane. Okay, continuing. That system, as described in the introductory paper for the series by David Cooperrider and William Passmore, the study coordinators from Case Western Reserve University, is based on, quote, the current transnationalization of world affairs whereby international relations of the non-territorial relations among private individuals, groups, and organizations... I skipped a line, my bad. Okay, quote, the current transnationalization of world affairs whereby international relations of the nation-state system have been superseded or supplanted by non-territorial relations among private individuals, groups, and organizations. I see. What is described and proposed is the reformation of the United Nations along lines already well in progress, to turn over all operations and key relations to an international network of hundreds of thousands of non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, and other groups of varying size, shape, and form. As the study reveals, virtually every one of these groups either traces its origins to the Tavistock Network's operatives or is influenced by such operatives. Nearly all such key groups have funding connections to either the British oligarchy and its American spores. In many cases, they have direct connections to the House of Lords and its members. Wow. The nation-state says Tavistock made the industrial age possible. Remove it and the industrial age will die, replaced by what is called the axial age, to be defined by informal relations, with the main medium of communication between peoples and groups being through computer interface. Such interface, now more commonly known as the Internet, can link these disparate groups, which Tavistock calls global social change organizations, and vastly enhance their activities and ease of deployment. There will be resistance to such ideas, says the rapporteurs coming from the entrenched bureaucracies of the industrial age and the transitional period. For example, the huge multinational corporations, which had helped usher in this globalization process, must eventually give way to new forms of organization, based on more informal structures. The corporate form, they say, is a relic of the industrial age. Government must become based more on smaller planning groups in local communities, tied together by telecommunications. Even the UN, with its cumbersome bureaucracy, must serve more as a forum for such local groups and less as a service to national governments. As for questions of sovereignty, they are soon to become even more meaningless, since the telecommunications internet can pass through any defense, any border. Globalization. When I was a freshman in college, they had us read a book called The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. He's a certainly controlled operative. He is always a guest on the mainstream news channels, and he wrote this book, The World is Flat, how the internet is globalizing the world very fast. And what he means by the world is flat is that it was dynamic before. Cultures were extremely different, and you went different places, and it was a whole new world. But now everyone and everything is becoming very similar because of technology, right? Like, it's not being done by people, even though clearly Tavistock's partially behind it. And it's an example of the college mockery. It was the first book I was assigned in college. The world is flat. Complete mockery. This is what they do. Everything is a lie. The first title of the first book I was assigned in college was The Truth. Right in front of my eyes. The world is flat. Ugh, crazy, dude. Thomas Friedman sucks. Okay. The transition to this new world will not be easy or without suffering, Tavistock indicates. It expects an economic cataclysm as the old system crashes down. But not to worry. The Recian shock troops will be there to ease the pain and help us into this brave new world of universal fascism. That's literally what 2020 was the start of. The typical member of one of these NGOs described in these reports is a zealot, not so unlike a member of a cult or Nazi party official. But one also notices a sickly smile across their faces, even as they are in heated argument. That smile, it has been noted, is the same seen on victims of Tavistock's brainwashers in their various mind-destroying experiments. The Tavistock grin, as it became known, is the true face of the New World Order. Wow. Pretty fascinating, right, guys? So, another example of a Tavistock-like group would be the Lucius Trust, which originally took the name Lucifer Trust, founded by Alice Bailey. And even to this day, the Lucius Trust is the publishing company used by the UN, the United Nations. And Alice Bailey herself was a Mystery Babylon religious occultist and wrote esoteric philosophy and used the Lucius Trust, or the Lucifer Trust, to publish works by all of the classic occultists that we talk about. She published the books about theosophy by Helena Blavatsky, right? Oh, man. The esoteric meaning of Lucifer. And because they got so much heat, they had to change the name to Lucius Trust. And even to this day, they have a page on their website where they say, oh, the meaning of Lucifer is just symbolic, as blah, 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 blah. But people eat it up because they're victims of this Tavistock brainwashing system. It's insane. Then, of course, Henry Robinson Luce. Let's talk about him a little bit. And I want to read out of The Brothers for you because they talk a little bit about John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles during this time period and their relationship to Henry Luce and how Time Magazine was used as a propaganda tool. So we're talking about the same people, Tavistock. Whether it's Time Magazine, Tavistock, or the Dulles brothers, they're all in the same clique. And they all very likely knew one another. So, Henry Robinson Luce. He was an American magazine magnate who was called the most influential private citizen in the America of his day. He launched and closely supervised a stable of magazines that transformed journalism and the reading habits of millions of Americans. Time summarized and interpreted the week's news. Life was a picture magazine of politics, culture, and society that dominated American visual perceptions in the era before television. Fortune reported on national and international business, and Sports Illustrated explored the world of sports. Counting his radio projects and newsreels, Luce created the first multimedia corporation. He envisaged that the United States would achieve world hegemony, and in 1941 he declared the 20th century would be the American century. So, we often look at a picture called the structure of Freemasonry. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. Right here. This is from Life magazine, the Henry Luce magazine. October 6, 1956? Something like that. Yeah. It was a approved Masonic fold-out page, and they had a long story about the structure of Freemasonry in an issue. So, let me take a quick break, and when I get back, we're going to talk about read a little bit about his relationship to the Dulles brothers and the CIA and the Department of the State. Okay, so we're going to read about the relationship between John Foster Dulles, Allen Dulles, and Henry Luce. Give you a little background. John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles were brothers who grew up in the aristocracy of America. I'm trying to get a picture for you. There we go. And let me pull it up. Yeah, that's it. So they grew up they were born in the late 1800s, I think, and started their careers in their early 20s at Sullivan and Cromwell, which is a firm on Wall Street, still exists today. Big political donator to the Democrats, both sides probably. And they went from Wall Street, where they would become friends with Henry Ford and all sorts of very important people. They would support the Nazis all the ways up until 1940 or 1941, I think, by helping them secure deals with American companies. They negotiated the IG Farben deal for Zyklon B gas that would be used to gas prisoners. And during the war, because they had made so many political friends at their Sullivan and Cromwell years, and of course their father and his father before him were all powerful too, they became spies in the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, where they worked for the president, and both went to Berlin and, took part in operations there. And after the Second World War, they were instrumental in convincing the government to create an intelligence agency. So Allen Dulles would become, I think, the third director of the CIA. He was still instrumental in creating it. He just wasn't the first director, I don't think. And I believe this is Allen right here. I'll talk about this painting. And then John became Secretary of State. And John had a close relationship with Henry Luce, and that's what we'll be reading about. These two men, one director of the CIA, one Secretary of State, both former spies and both Wall Street lawyers pretty much, and financiers, were single-handedly responsible for planning, designing, and carrying out the overthrow of 6 governments during their tenures in those positions. One of them was Guatemala, and they overthrew Guatemala in order to secure United States Fruit Company for no other reason than having complete control of the banana trees in Guatemala. They overthrew the government. So you can see, by this time, our government's completely controlled by Luciferian, occultist, Masonic royalty, so they call themselves, right? And that's what this painting here is describing. Allen Dulles here, his hand's on a bomb, and Eisenhower's face is on the bomb, of course, right? Because Eisenhower would work with them and provide the muscle whenever needed, and the military supplies. He's shaking this man's hand right here, who has a Hitler mustache, and he has some money in his pocket and a pistol. And you can see all across the ground are dead bodies, tortured bodies, tied up, children, decapitated. And you can see here, it's all over bananas. These bags of bananas, right? And in return, getting what looks like wheat from the United States. So this was all about making money and providing a more pomp lifestyle for the wealthy. So they just worked together with the CIA to cause an uprising, to cause an overthrow, to put innocent people in jail, right? And they hid behind the Catholic Church the whole time. You see this guy right here in a black robe, the Jesuit robe? Exactly. The Dulles family is a missionary family. The Luce family was a missionary family. These are the descendants of Jesuit missionaries, like you see right here. And yeah, I think this is by Diego Rivera. This painting's called Glorious Victory. So I'm going to start reading. One of the most productive relationships Foster developed in the 1940s was with the ambitious journalistic entrepreneur Henry Luce, who had become the country's most powerful opinion maker. Luce's views reached 1 million subscribers to Time, 4 million subscribers to Life, 18 million listeners who heard the March of Time each week on the radio, countless more who watched the March of Time newsreels, and an elite business audience that subscribed to Fortune. By one estimate, at least a third and perhaps considerably more of the total literate adult population in the country. No other media baron had anything approaching his reach or influence. His most famous article, The American Century, which appeared in the February 17, 1941 issue of Life, was a stirring call for the most powerful and vital nation in the world to embrace world leadership. Quote, "We are the inheritors of all the great principles of Western civilization," end quote, Luce wrote. Quote, "It now becomes our time to be the powerhouse," end quote. Foster had much in common with Luce. Both were internationalist, pro-business Republicans shaped by Calvinist principles and the missionary tradition. Luce's parents were missionaries, and he was born in China. Both believed Providence had ordained for the United States a unique role in the world. Both abhorred all forms of socialism and saw in Moscow a godless tyranny dedicated to destroying the West. Fighting communism was a challenge they believed history had assigned to their generation. Well, we know they're just playing their parts, right? The two Presbyterians, Luce and Dulles, would cause suspense and even terror in ensuing years because of their determination to reshape the world as closely as possible after the pattern of American transcendence. So, what did we just learn from the Tavistock Institute? That society can be manipulated by using terror, right? One of Luce's biographers has written, "Both had the good fortune of discovering that their religion and their politics were complementary. Both Presbyterians were men of great mental vigor, who sunk to narrowest parochialism in the area where the molten materials of their religion, patriotism, and politics fused into one cold and flinty mass. Such ferociously aggressive men were uncomfortable with ideological competition. When either Luce or Dulles started talking about America's priceless spiritual heritage or the hopes of all who love freedom, lesser nations had reason to become uneasy." Luce did as much as anyone to transmit the Cold War consensus to Americans. Somewhat unexpectedly, he found a partner in Foster, who was undergoing a remarkable transformation. In the space of less than a year, between late 1945 and the middle of 1946, Foster moved from preaching tolerance and forgiveness to promoting the devil theory he had formerly scorned. In a series of articles for Life, he painted a steadily more frightening picture of the Soviet threat. His first major volley was a two-part series published in June 1946 entitled Thoughts on Soviet Conduct and What to Do About It. In it, he set the urgent tone that defined how he, the loose press, the Republican and Democratic parties, and most Americans would view the world for a generation. Soviet leaders, Foster wrote, had launched a worldwide campaign that aimed to subjugate the West, to eliminate what are, to us, the essentials of a free society, and to impose on conquered peoples a system repugnant to our ideals of humanity and fair play. Now you know who JFK was quoting when he said that. Already, he asserted, the Soviets had built a shadowy network of allies in non-communist countries who pretended to be patriots but in reality take much guidance from Moscow. This made Soviet communism the unseen force directing nationalist movements in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It's because of people like Luce publishing this stuff, they were able to justify to the public the overthrow of all these countries, right? Never in history have a few men in a single country achieved such worldwide influence, he concluded. Foster's view of the Soviet Union as a center of global conspiracy did not place him on the outer fringes of public opinion. At times, he used a more melodramatic vocabulary than President Truman, Senator Vandenberg, Secretary of State George Marshall, and foreign policy mandarins like George Kennan and Averell Harriman. But all shared the same essential view that Soviet communism was, in Kennan's words, a great political force intent on our destruction. Yeah, so Luce is probably the greatest propagandist in American history. as unfortunate as that is. And he has a very fitting name for his role, right? Henry Luce. So I think we'll wrap it up and we'll do a little recap about what we've talked about. We started with that example of subliminal messaging from the 1960s. So really the theme of what we've talked about today is that this beast system, this Babylon, modern day Babylon, is in full effect by the time World War II is over. They would establish the United Nations afterwards. They established Israel right after World War II. Right away, the American intelligence community and the, I guess, globalist intelligence community sets out to destroy governments. Iran, Guatemala, the Congo, Vietnam, country after country. And of course, they do this under the guise of democracy, but the real goal is to secure rare earth materials, right? Especially in Africa. That's what's going on, because they need these rare earth materials to feed the beast system, to create these new technologies. You know, the little rare earth metals that are inside of our cell phones, things like that, diamonds, of course, gold, all that stuff. So really the beast is in full control. And when Henry Luce is saying America needs to become a powerhouse, he is revealing the method. He's telling you the actual esoteric purpose of America, why America was created, what America's job was. Henry Luce is telling the truth. America's time is now to become a powerhouse. Remember, the Vatican is in charge of the spiritual aspect. The City of London is in charge of the financial aspect. America is the muscle of this Baphomet global New World Order system, right? And now the UN is the fourth part of that structure. So in New York City, the General Assembly is its own entity. It's like Washington, D.C. It's not part of America. And now there is a global governing body. And what happens right away? Police action in Korea. So all over the world, the effects of this change in imperialism from post-industrial to neo-colonial, they're being felt by everybody across the world except the subjects of these empire states, right? Except the Americans and the people of the UK. They don't see what's going on because they're being lied to by men like Henry Luce. Meanwhile, all over the world, the New World Order is already being instituted. You know, we should understand that the New World Order arrived years ago for a lot of countries on this earth, and we just don't hear about it. We don't hear because we're not allowed to hear their opinions, because information is controlled completely and our reality is crafted. And yeah, we are certainly living in a time of neo-colonialism, as the Tavistock Institute calls it. And before I let you guys go, we really only covered like 4 topics in 2 hours. So what else are we going to talk about next time? Radio, we talked about that. We're going to talk about some of the presidents. I want to explain to you the creation of the Pentagon and how it really is symbolic of the 32nd degree of Freemasonry. And in my opinion, the attack on Pearl Harbor was part of the ceremony and ritual of FDR receiving that degree. I know that sounds insane, but hear me out. We'll talk about it next time. What else we got here? Tavistock, we'll probably read a little bit more. The Lucius Trust, we can read that next time. We talked about this painting. We'll talk about the church committee next time. That'll probably be the next thing we start with, right? Which is an exposure of MK Ultra and Operation Mockingbird, how the CIA controls the media. And look at the eagle right on it, right? Classic. We'll talk about Soldier of Fortune magazine. And at the end, we'll kind of remake the episode I did like a month ago, basically going over all the false flags that have happened since like the 1990s, right? And knowing what you know now about Tavistock and about the effects of terror and fear on a populace and an individual, you know, looking back at all of these, it's going to make perfect sense what the agenda is. And yeah, we'll pick it up there. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.